Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Peripheral. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So, first and foremost, we kind of finally see just how bad and how evil Corbell can be. It takes a lot to kill a whole bunch of people simultaneously by locking them in a car for vehicles for long periods of time so they eventually die from like heat stroke. That's rough. And just to prove a point, to then like nail their bodies to crosses and then put them on display and like I think in like the front of like the city limits, or like he was saying like, oh, he initially was going, like he was making it sound like, oh, he found God or something like that, knowing that that's what this was all about, that he was just making a point, like because it was like a local gang. I guess they were either stepping in on his territory, because he talks about it later on, like he cleaned up the town. So either he was like, oh, they're selling stuff in my town, well, I'm going to do it better than them and I'm not going to have as much of an issue. Or is it just because he, like, it's like, no, you're competition, so I'm removing you from the equation? Because who knows if he was in the drug game at that point in time. He sure as hell is now, and apparently that's who they were. They were like another drug gangster. And like, the fact is and it was kind of a lesson for Jasper that sometimes you're going to have to be cruel and ruthless. But I mean, like, that's some next level shit. Like, wow. And Jasper was fairly young when he saw that. I'm assuming his mom and dad aren't in the picture. His uncle seems to be the only family he has. You know, I mean, maybe even back then, like maybe his mom and dad died, or just whatever the circumstances may be. He kind of couldn't escape his uncle because that's the only family he had. And now it's like, makes sense why he's just kind of naturally stuck around him, because it's like, right, you most likely raised me, taught me everything I know. But it doesn't seem like Jasper, who knows how involved in everything, because Jasper like drops off the money. You know, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but he dropped off the money and that was about it. Because also like Billy Ann doesn't want to be in the, it's particular, like because they're having that conversation and he's like, well, Uncle Corbell knows like you don't like any of that drug stuff, so like, so he might be involved, but Billy Ann might just like not want to hear about it, or maybe she just in general like doesn't like want Jasper at all involved in all that. It's hard to say, but it's not 100% clear, like, because there is a very big distinction between those two. So it's definitely going to be interesting to find out where things kind of go on that front. But we also got some interesting insight in this episode about Wilf. I thought I heard Alita call him Wolf in the first episode. I was like, maybe I was wrong. I was like, I'm pretty sure she called him Wolf. She did. His actual name is actually Wolfgang, which I'm like, that's a pretty dope name. Because he is a like German descent as well, so it's like, oh, it makes sense. Because I guess Wolfgang is generally speaking like a, because I know like isn't there like a famous chef or cook named Wolfgang Puck? I also think of like Wolfgang from the show Sense8 on Netflix. I don't know how common the name Wolfgang is in German. Like, is that like, it's probably not like Jane or John, but like, I'm curious like how common that is, or is it like actually a pretty rare name? I don't know. Just thought that was kind of interesting, but his name became Wilf, short for Wilfred, because that was the only way him and Alita were going to stay together. They only initially wanted Alita, but like for whatever reason, their mom saw something in Alita, and the way Wilfred puts it later on, it's like, oh, yeah, she had certain aspects of her personality. There were certain quirks that, like, she didn't have the negative quirks in her personality, right? And so it definitely seems like she has issues with Alita, but she definitely has bigger issues with Wilf, because I guess for him, it's like, right, I'm the child I know you didn't want, because you wanted Alita, but you ended up getting me because me and Alita were a package deal, and she wasn't going to go without me. And so he ended up having to, like, he's like, yeah, he conformed for their sake, because they're like, oh, we'll give you a more traditional name, like Wilfred. And he was like, yeah, I can go by Wilfred. He did it simply so that him and Alita could stay together, but you can tell that look on Alita's face. She didn't like that, because, like, she refused to kind of bend to what they wanted, but for him to do it. But for him, it's like, I'll do anything as long as it means staying next to you. So it's like, right. I mean, they've known each other since they were kids, so it's understandable why she's so important to him. And I don't know if that moment right there was kind of like a bigger, like the beginning of some division between them. Maybe it wasn't the biggest thing, but just that small moment there. Maybe that kind of plays a little bit in, that little, like, having to like bend a knee to someone. Maybe that started there. I mean, and maybe that also leads to why, like, maybe Wilf will always have some contentious relationship with his parents no matter what because of that. I don't know. I just think that's just kind of an interesting thing. Obviously, like, present day for them as in the future, like 20, was it almost like 2100 now. Like, his dad's been going for a couple years now. So all they have is their mom, and it definitely neither one of them has a good relationship with her. Um, there was that whole thing about them being immunized. Jesus. So it does seem like there was probably like some like fallout, considering like even Flynn's picking up on, like, yeah, it doesn't seem like there's many people left in the future. So something. I mean, once again, 70 years, a lot can happen. So probably a lot of like maybe just the natural state of the earth, like, all the issues that the earth has ended up becoming an issue. Not just like on the human front, but well, the human front affects things on like a climate and global front. So I don't know if it's like a natural byproduct of just the human footprint on this planet that's kind of led to like why things ended up being what they needed to be, why they were immunized, or was that something more human man-made that led to that fallout, why they needed to be immunized? Because it did seem like I took that as like, I didn't know if that was like, because it was like, oh, like being on the outside might not have been great, or so, I don't know, or maybe just the immunization was just because they're kids that lived on the street. It could be an amalgamation of many different things. I initially took it as like like maybe there's almost like a borderline plague thing going on, but I'm like, you wouldn't, even if they were immunized, would you even take, like, as hoity-toity as their parents seem, like, I wouldn't expect them to do that, but I don't know. Makes you almost wonder, I mean, maybe, because I'm also thinking, like, wow, did they not have any children of their own? Like, is it harder to have children naturally in this time frame or something? I don't know. There's just a lot we don't know about Alita and Wolfgang's circumstance. A lot about, like, the world at this, even that, roughly speaking, over these next 70 years from Flynn's time, we don't know just what the state of the world fully is. So Flynn ended up telling Billy Ann everything about what went on, which even she's probably still having a hard time swallowing everything. But I mean, you can't really deny the fact. It's like, well, their mom is healthier now, and she can see, which that's going to be a whole thing that they're going to have to deal with. But Billy Ann's like, oh, wow, you really believe all this? And she's like, yeah, I really do, about what's going on. And so she's sworn to secrecy and stuff, but this does put them in a very complicated space, as Burton puts it later on. It's like, who is her husband and who is his uncle? It's like, right, it's Jasper. Because whatever Billy Ann knows, Jasper knows. And whatever Jasper knows, his uncle's going to find out sooner or later, which is kind of the whole point that Corbell's wife suggests, like, hey, like, we've got multiple choices about how we handle this. We can either take the money, we can not take the money at all, and don't worry about it and just wait to see how things play out. But these might be the type of people who, if they've got the resources to do this, we might not want to do that. We could also take the money and not do anything, but that could also, have the same end result. Or we could take the money and do it, but the problem is this could be like a sting operation, and then like basically your ass gets arrested for like taking this deal, because this whole thing could be a setup. Obviously, we as the audience know this is a legit situation of just wanting them dead. But it does make Corbell wonder, like, well, why would anyone want them dead? What are they mixed up in? I don't know, because I wonder, is it just a thing of, is this some other competition stepping into my town? And it's like, right, you have to go through me, and he probably isn't too amendable to any other competition stepping in town, as we've seen how he's handled stuff. Yes, that was 15 years ago at that time frame. It was like 15 years ago, but even more, I'm sure he still rules with an iron fist like that, because even Flynn was like, oh, I know who he is and I know what he's done. And she's like, take that off the screen, which almost like makes you go like, that one in particular bothered her. I'm like, does that have any correlation to someone they knew? Because I don't remember if they've talked about their dad or not. Because I'm almost like, Well, you don't think it had anything to do with that? Like he wasn't one of the people they murdered, did he? I don't know, because Flynn definitely has her issues with him, but I don't know if it's like personal like that or whether it's just more so like a I know what kind of a bad guy you are, so I'm sticking clear of you. I mean, kind of have no choice. You are connected because like right, uh, your best friend is married to his nephew, so there is going to be that direct correlation and connection regardless of it all, you know? So whether there's something more tangibly personal between them, we've yet to see. Because it could just be, I mean, she has many reasons to just be like, take that off the screen. I don't want to see his handiwork. Because it's maybe because he's done some like villainous shit like that before. And it's just a reminder of who he is. And it's like, I don't need a reminder. Everyone has a pretty good idea of who he is, you know? So I even love the situation of Flynn finding out, like returning to her peripheral and finding out. It's like, wait, do you guys put me in a box? And Lev being like, no, 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 of course we don't. Because him and Wilf were just having that conversation about, like, he's like, oh, I thought we put it in a bed. He's like, but why? It's a thing. And what do you do with things? You put them in boxes. Because Wilf sees the peripherals as a little bit more because they look so human. Yeah, they're like kind of treated like, yeah, because they're just like on autopilot. They are just things. They're kind of, um, uh, I mean, just kind of like how sleeves are treated in carbon, ultra carbon. I mean, that's why they kind of have that name of sleeves because they're treated as like, I'm gonna jump into another sleeve. It's kind of that thing. So it's like I don't know. I thought that was interesting. Obviously, there's a conversation about Mariel too that kind of comes up. The lady whose eye they took in the first episode. Um, the question is like what happened to her, and it's like apparently she's vanished. So because even now like I think Flint's starting to regret everything because it's like wow, like all that I did, I drugged a lady just for her to get her eye cut out. It's like yeah, that was Alita. She didn't tell you what was what. You thought this was all a video game. You thought this was a sim, which even Wolf makes that remark of yeah, you cut us, we bleed. And makes her kind of regrets it even more because it's like, right, I treated this whole situation like a game, like this was just, yeah, and I was messing with real people's lives. Like I did that. I'm the reason why, like I played a role in making that happen. You know, I mean, Alita could have give you the heads up this was real, but obviously it's like she didn't on purpose. She wanted you to keep thinking it was just a sim, so you'd be more once again amendable to do what she wants you to do. Makes it easier. We also found out like the full context of what the word pulp means. It means poltergeist. It's short for poltergeist. So I was like, oh man, that's such an interesting. Because it's like, I mean, it makes sense because you are like legitimately like possessing a body. So I was like, oh, it's actually a really apt terminology to use in this regard of like someone inside of a peripheral. And because obviously they talk. It makes sense because obviously the application that is being used now of like transferring someone into from a stub into it, like probably it wasn't the initial intentions of peripherals. I mean, who knows what the research institute, maybe that was always a plan, or maybe they found out later on it could be applied this way. But like the fact is, I talked about it like, oh yeah, Lita had in a previous episode I talked about how Lita showed up in that little girl form, specifically a peripheral that like looked like herself when she was a little girl. So it is that thing of like it is an everyday item. I mean, especially the way Wilf talked about how you could use it. He was like, oh, pretending that oh god, that Flynn was his girlfriend. It's like, oh yeah, she's visiting from Canada and this peripheral, and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. It's like the new form of travel, probably if you have enough money, because I mean, we have no idea like how expensive, I mean, because then you kind of get into like Detroit Become Human type of thing of like how. Because of where they are in that point in time, like how expensive are peripherals, but using that as a form of like rather than physically traveling, like I mean, once again, it's just interesting knowing like the casual means of which peripherals, like the purposes that they serve in that world is just kind of interesting. But also like once again kind of introduced to like that technology that allows like Wilf and Flynn to kind of. I even love like the simplicity of just like the thing with your fingers and your like your index finger and your thumb, like how you control it. you also have to be careful because basically you're intertwining, like you're interfacing with another human being and kind of becoming one with them, and how much you're doing to the point she would like Flint start feeling sick. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, that's my hangover from yesterday, and it's like it made some adjustments, and now she's good. So I just thought that was such an interesting thing, and it plays very nicely in the episode, especially because now Flynn was informed about obviously Corbell and ended up having to bring that back to Burton, which they've had their disagreements about how things should be handled. He made some unilateral decisions without involving her. Obviously buying like the 3D printing shop that she works at, making her the boss of it, but it's like you're mainly going to be our intel person. Like your main thing is going to be getting inside that peripheral and talking to everybody in the future, our contacts and everything, and get us the information we need. He even bought a new car, well, rented a new car. So spending that money that they got, I mean, it helps having a 3D printing shop because you can kind of lock and load whenever you need to. I mean, it's kind of like their gun garage of sorts that they can like stockpile and like kind of use that, I guess, as not necessarily probably like it's probably not like a full base of operation. It's probably mainly just a means of once again like restocking weapons and such. But obviously Flynn doesn't like the way Burton's kind of taking control of the situation, like he's in complete control. But once again, it's a conversation to like, well, what do we do about mom? It's like, well, the fact of the matter is, eventually her doctor's going to find out about her getting better and the fact that she can see. So how do we handle that? Eventually her doctor, as well as other people, are going to start asking questions. And once again, he's not too happy about her telling Billy Ann everything. But then there's also the conversation about, well, we know Corbell's coming after us. All right, let's go find them and kill him. And it's like, wait, what? And it's like, no, we don't have to do that. It's like, well, he's like, I'm literally trained to do that. Like the Corps literally like spent money making me into doing that exact type of thing. But she wants to find another like another way around it. And once again, making a unilateral decision, he has a meeting with Corbell, and we learned a lot of interesting things about how the haptic situation works. Basically, the Corps very specifically picks a group of people like grew up in a small town, because basically, if you're already kind of a little bit of a small unit yourself, it makes the whole transition. It makes it that much more. I'm probably like an easier transition between like the haptic feedbacks of you all kind of being looped together, and it was really kind of fascinating the way Burton talked about it. He was just like, I mean, obviously it's like you have like this, like the speed and the violence for action. It's kind of like a byproduct of it, but he made reference to like, at one point he blacked out at one point and beat the ever living shit out of a guy. And it's like, I don't even know why it's like, well, apparently someone in his unit, it's like that guy beat him up like some years ago in like a bar fight or something, or just beat him up, regardless. And somewhere deep inside of him, Burton reacted in that regard. And it's just like, yeah, I beat the crap. Like, so I don't know if it's like a full blown you share memories thing, but it's like there's some instinctual connections there where it's like, yeah, instinctually that guy, if you ever saw that guy again, had said like, oh, I would kill him, I'd beat the living crap out of him for what he did to me. And now Burton ended up being kind of the outlet of that, just because they are so intertwined. And that even plays into the title of this episode, Haptic Drift, which he warns Flynn about, because Flynn's like, yeah, because of her connection with Wilf, she was like, now I know kind of how the haptic stuff feels, because even Burton's like, yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but he says basically when you meld with someone, like, two souls becoming one is such a weird thing that you have to be careful about it, because if you can get lost in it, because he's like, yeah, you might confuse like that connection with someone with love, because for a minute I think Flynn was feeling that, because her and Wilf were connected at the time, and then him getting close to her and him kissing her, and she was back home like feeling it, being like, oh wow. But now she's like, oh, it's just like haptic drift, there was like nothing there. Like that's why I'm suddenly feeling this connection and spark there, simply because of that. So we're also getting stuff little by little, continuing on the research institute side of things with like Charisse, and she's talking to Daniel about obviously trying to find trying to like, shouldn't we be able to handle going after one little girl, Flynn, and killing her? It's like, why kind of handle things the way you've been handling? Shouldn't it be like really easy just to end up killing her? And so they're trying to figure out who's back rolling Alita. Well, because we know it's Lev in them, because they're trying to figure out what like family is kind of doing that. We know it's Lev, but it's going to be a little while before the Research Institute is able to kind of really untangle like the back channels to figure out who's responsible. And there's that whole situation where she's trying to make a point. She's like, okay, if I wanted to kill you just because I needed to, I could do it with a wave of a hand. And she like waves her hand in the ground, like kind of like turns almost into sand and kind of like dissolves away. But it turns out it was just like technological like wizardry to make it seem like that there was nothing there. But it's like basically the ground became translucent, completely invisible, in fact. And I'm curious, is it because she has some augmentation to herself that allowed her to do that, or is it specifically because they are in like the Research Institute building, so he or she kind of can play the role of a god? I mean, maybe that doesn't just stop here. Maybe, like I said, maybe it's something in her body that, I mean, because I wonder if she's up, in a peripheral as well, or because we can obviously the peripherals can be given some augmentations as well. So I mean, who knows? That whole scene with Grace was actually kind of like heartbreaking, because it's like, oh, because Grace and Alita knew each other before like they even started working here, and now it's like, okay, so Grace is the reason why Alita knows about the stub situation at all. So, which I was at first, I was like, oh, like it took me a while to recognize. It took me a while to recognize why I recognize the actress who played Grace from. She's oh God, is it Dina or Dinah from The Punisher? I almost didn't recognize her until I was looking into it, and I was like, oh my God, that's where I recognize you from. Her name's Amber. Also, like, I wonder, is that a byproduct of, like, if you look at her eyes, she has like very like amber colored eyes to some extent. Maybe that's just me exaggerating, but it's just like the way the light hits her eyes multiple times. Like, I saw it in the pictures, and I kind of saw it somewhat in the scenes. I was like, her eyes are very like, I don't know, they seem so distinct, especially when like the light hits them. Either way, it's also the first time because I didn't know she was an English actress, so this is the first time me hearing what I'm assuming is her natural accent. Because then obviously in Punisher she was using an American accent, so that was just interesting. But I knew, like, especially she was like when Charisse was telling that story about like how basically like just when they kind of lose sight of things, in the moment she was stirring the honey into the tea, I was like, it's poisoned or something. She killed you. Literally at the moment she's saying about like the moment you lose focus and don't see what's going on in front of you, she's steering that. I was like, oh yeah. And especially because they made sure to show you she drunk it first, and because yeah, the Charisse had steered up hers, but she didn't drink hers. But we saw immediately that Grace had picked hers up, and it's like, so it ended up being more so like a it was almost like a pheromone type of thing, where it's like when she would, as it burned through her body, she would sweat, and basically she would register to the bees like a hornet, and it would like set them into overdrive. So all the bees just came in and just stung her, and it's like, right, I understand. Because, Grace is like, I'm sorry, I have 2 children. And it's like, no, exactly. Think about that. She's like, and you would do anything to protect your children. And I think that's what she's saying for the Research Institute. It's like, this is my baby, and I'm trying to protect it. And not just that, specifically this project that, the whole stub situation that Alita, like, it's like she only knew about it because you told her that information. So, and now poor Grace ended up dying because of it. So that sucked major. They ultimately, we had the whole Wilf and Flynn thing of them and eventually finding out where Alita was. Or like what she was at one point in time, because they ended up discovering that riddle that she had left her mom about where she was staying. It's like, oh, the moment they mentioned Jon Snow, I was like, that's not like a game of, they're not, but it's like, no, it's like the person who discovered and cured cholera, I think is what Wolf's was saying. So it's like, okay, very different Jon Snow. I'm not well versed in Game of Thrones, but when I saw the name Jon Snow, but it was also spelled differently, so I was like, I didn't know if that was just like a subtitle thing. It was like, no, but it was also kind of a distinction to show like they're not the same Jon Snow. Either way, they ended up finding it ended up being the facility where Mario's eye was cut out of, and all the people, the surgeons there were also peripherals as well. So, and we see what happens when they're not given their, was it nutrient bath? Like if they almost look like, God, what would be the thing to compare it to? It almost looks like their skin was like drying up like a plant to some extent. I don't know if that's an apt description, but you can see like just almost like this decaying effect on their face, which was kind of so interesting. And it's like, right, that's what happens. So peripheries have to like be actively maintained before, because after a couple of days they end up in that state. So, but what was also interesting too is at that place, Flynn noticed that there was kind of like a 3D model of like the general area around her house. It's like there's the trailer where she's at right now in the hijacking into the peripheral. Then there's like Burton and his squad plus their house, and it's like, okay, so why does she have like a model of this? Like, I'm curious like what that's all about. So I'm trying to remember. I don't think they found anything that leading them to exactly where Alita would be afterwards. But Daniel does show up, and that really does, suck in this instance of like him using that weapon again, and it turns out like obviously there are going to be repercussions for it being used. He's like, oh yeah, like it's going to leave its trauma, it's going to leave its mark. You might think like, oh, if this peripheral gets destroyed, it's like, oh well, it's like, but it's still going to have its ramifications. I'm sure there's still ramifications for when she was in Burton's like peripheral, and because we could see like the effect it was having on her back in 2032. Because she's already got some issues that seem to be a byproduct of using this continuously. Like she's like, yeah, her hand will squeeze randomly without her being doing that on purpose. So, but yeah, this is all about something that, once again, I don't think Alita has it. Whatever it is that she made, whatever she made Flynn like download from the Research Institute, that secret whatever it was. Once again, I had brought it up previously. I wasn't sure if Alita ended up getting it, because it seemed like it was because she specifically made Flynn use the peripheral's natural eye and not the one taken from Mariel. So it's like, so it might be whatever it is like somewhere in Flynn's brain, and she just doesn't realize it. Like, I think it went through the device and went specifically into Flynn's brain. But like I said, I didn't know if that was just like whether Alita had access to that or not, or that she's leaving it with Flynn for now until they're able to finally meet up and she can remove it from her head. I don't know. Either way, Charisse definitely wasn't going to let him keep talking, so it ends up slicing Daniel's throat. But I mean, she made it clear, like if need be, she will kill him, and that would ends up becoming so true later on in the episode. So I had actually completely forgotten to talk about the whole thing of because like I was so completely forgot about, like, I was so caught up in like the haptic discussion, I forgot to talk about the actual conclusion between Corbell and Burton, where it's like, right, we'll strike a deal where it's like, hey, you can either get like, we could hit this situation. He's like, right, the carrot or the stick. Gave him the carrot, like, hey, we could pay you $200,000 a week for you to leave me and my family alone, but or if anything happens to me or my sister, we will kill you. And he's like, oh, like, I do feel pretty safe here and stuff. All he has to do is use the haptic point. His boy ends up like flying a bullet towards them, and it's like, yo, next one will hit you. So do we have a deal or not? And he agrees to it. But some issues do arise. We do see that Tommy sees that, so he's going to become an issue, because it's like, right, that camouflage car on the property, now this, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're up there making deals with Corbell, like unknown criminal, like what's going on. He's probably going to be asking Flynn about that. But also Jasper, his uncle kind of inadvertently tricking him into because he's like, hey, like oh, here's a little bit of this money, and it's like, oh, okay. And he's like, the problem is, and this is going to be a lesson for you to learn, never take any money without asking what someone's going to want in exchange. And he tried to give it back. He's like, no, it's too late, it's yours. So what he wants is he wants to find out what the Fishers are mixed up in. He's like, yeah, they might be in some dangers. You don't want the Fishers to be in any trouble, right? They're good people. He's like, yeah, they are good people. It's like his because he even said like, oh my, like he doesn't think much of Jasper because he's like, oh my half-wit nephew, and it's like, yeah, because Jasper's going to do this because he's like, no, like obviously they are good people, and obviously like once again his like Flynn's his wife's bestie, so it's like no, I want to, so he's going to be spying on them, so Billy Ann's going to have to be careful what she says around him because he's going to start asking questions. So we'll see how that plays out, but once again, because he wants to know where exactly are they getting the money to pay him $200,000 a week. I mean, they could always be like, I mean, eventually it's going to lead back to their cousin Leo, but he's going to be like, yeah, I won the lottery and stuff, so maybe that might be enough of a dead end that it won't be an issue, but we'll see what that ends up becoming. Whether I mean, that might not be enough because it's just like still having Jasper all up in their business, reporting back to his uncle, because any leverage he gets, he's going to take advantage of that. So both having futuristic help on their side, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this ultimately ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.